and welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports Network. That's Danny Kanell, that's Tom Fornelli, that's Bud Elliott. I'm Chip Patterson, coming to you live from Lucas Oil Stadium. Here, the site of the Big Ten championship game. Fired up to spend the next couple of hours previewing, yes, the matchup between number 1 Oregon and number 3 Penn State, as well as the rest of conference championship weekend. Danny, gentlemen, we've been here for, about a day or so. We're starting to get a feel for what's going on around town.
Yeah.
Any surprises, any takeaways from our time in Indianapolis so far?
I knew it was going to be cold. I didn't know it was going to be 11 when I got off the plane, so I was a little bit surprised by that. For our guy Fornelli, he's just like a polar bear. He's just rolling around last night at dinner, and reveling in it. But, yeah, I think it's going to get even more ramped up today. It's one of my favorite parts about getting here early. We got in Thursday night. Now, all of a sudden, today, more people will start to come in. The energy starts to ramp up. You start to see people around town. Cannot wait.
Also, it is getting warmer. I think the temperatures are now in the upper 20s, so, it's getting to be summerific here in the middle of December in Indianapolis.
I think we're hearing a lot from the fans, too, on our social media in town. Like they say, hey, Cover 3, awesome. Appreciate you guys coming out, and see them at the hotel this morning was great.
All right, we're going to be doing a full breakdown of this Oregon-Penn State game in just a little bit, but just to look elsewhere, I want to do a vibe check. And if you're familiar with Cover 3, you know that sometimes, we just need to understand when there's a lot of news, when there's a lot of headlines, we just want to cut through it, okay? What do we actually think? But is Bill Belichick going to be the next head coach at North Carolina? Because that is the kind of there's a lot to get to here, and I'm not going to go total locals corner here, but, what do you make of that report that North Carolina has, in fact, interviewed the former legendary Super Bowl winning New England Patriots head coach Bill Belichick?
It gets us talking about it, right? And I think it also is a signal to the NFL that, hey, I like coaching ball still. If you're willing to deal with all of the nonsense that comes from coaching college football, like NIL, the fact your entire roster can change over basically every year, you're recruiting, parents, agents, all that kind of stuff, then I think you're really showing you still love coaching and you really want to get into it and still signal to the NFL, I'm not done. Hire me back to the NFL. But Chip, if your Tar Heels get Bill Belichick, man, it's on. Wow.
It is somewhat of a surprise to think that Bill Belichick would want a college coaching job, but he is now dating college students, so maybe now he wants to coach them as well. You just look at the situation, though. I don't really think it's that realistic. I think that maybe you're appeasing some people in power who want you to interview Bill Belichick. I think for Belichick, like you said, but it is good for people to know that he is interested in getting back. But I know that in his heart, he is a traditionalist. He loves college football, and I bet he loves the idea of coaching at a college program. But the college football he grew up loving and that kind of deal is not what we're dealing with now. It's basically you're just running the New England Patriots again, except you don't have a salary cap, nor do you have Tom Brady. But I want to know, would you want Bill Belichick coaching at North Carolina?
Great for content, so yes. Nothing's better than to get buzz and attention, but ultimately, I do think that would be I'm looking for the zag, right? You can't go from a 73-year-old to a 72-year-old. I just think that if you're looking for that new energy, if you're looking for that new life, if you're North Carolina and you're trying to hire a head coach that's going to be there for 5, 6, 7, if you're lucky, even longer than that, a decade, it's not going to be Bill Belichick. And so, great for the job cachet, incredible for content, for sure. But I would say that for North Carolina football fans, they would like to see something that's maybe a little bit more forward-thinking.
You're telling me you're turning around a 6-time Super Bowl winning coach, and that's not good enough for you?
He lost his
what are we
fastball.
doing?
We
Of course. And we
fastball.
argued about this last night at dinner. You got 5 years minimum. If age is a concern, he's healthy. Yeah. He looks good. He's got a young girlfriend. He's doing great. I think the biggest surprise is I can't imagine Bill Belichick in a living room selling some 17-year-old. That, to me, is just a weird dynamic. But I do think the connection with his son, Steve Belichick's the defensive coordinator at Washington, so maybe he's been talking to him about the college football schemes, about the landscape. Maybe he sees it as manageable, and maybe the transactional aspect of football, which is here, and it's only going to get more transactional with the revenue share, maybe that makes it more attractive to him where he doesn't have to go kiss these kids' butts and just have it about relationship. It's no, tell me what your number is and we'll get to here in Chapel Hill.
And the future of revenue sharing also, Mac Brown in his final press conference after the NC State loss said that whoever takes over next will have a better financial situation if we get into revenue sharing, that the money that would be allotted, essentially the salary cap that you'd be working with, was more money than the NIL war chest that they had to deal with. Obviously, they were able to retain Amarian Hampton. They were able to keep, Kamon Rucker from going somewhere else. So they had something, they were able to fundraise enough. But if you're Bill Belichick and you've got that revenue sharing in place, then you don't have to worry about some of those same dynamics.
And Chip, as of now, no important Carolina players have hit the portal yet, right? So it seems like they're all sticking around waiting to see who Carolina hires, and those NIL deals must be pretty good still.
One more thought on the coaching carousel before we hit a break and get into this matchup right here. What other names or jobs, Danny, have you got your eyes on right now in terms of hey, if you want to talk about Bronco? I mean, there's also been some movement.
That's a great move. And to see him back in the state of Utah, a place where he's familiar with, he had such success at BYU, going back there to Utah State, I think that's a good one. My eyes are focused on John Sumrall because he's the hottest name that everybody's talked about and targeted as the most attractive option. So he's got a championship to hopefully go playing and win against Army. We'll see if what happens after that game. Is it UNC? Are they in the mix? Is it UCF? Is it somebody else that's at play? That's the name that I'm looking at because he's the most attractive coach right now in this market.
I do think the Bronco Mendenhall hire is a tremendous hire for Utah State when you look at what he's been able to accomplish throughout his career. So to get him to take that job, huge for them. But the one job outside of John Sumrall and where he's going to end up, I want to see what happens at West Virginia. Jimbo Fisher has been connected to that job. I don't think that's going to happen. But there are some people who I'm hearing are very interested in the idea of getting back together with Rich Rod and bringing him back to Morgantown. He's had success at Jacksonville State. They'll be playing in the Conference USA title game. Do they bring him back to Morgantown and try to get the old, the sparks reignited and get that program humming again?
If it's not one of those two guys, I could see like a Barry Odom at UNLV. I could see a Chadwell at Liberty deciding hey, that's a job you could step up to.
Rich Rodriguez, Jacksonville State. That's the Conference USA Championship game. You can watch it on CBS Sports Network on Friday night. We've got our friend Amanda Guerra working the sidelines there in beautiful Jacksonville, Alabama. So be sure to check that out later on. Well, coming up on the other side from the coaching carousel to this game right here, we'll take you inside the matchup. Oregon, Penn State, strengths, weaknesses, X factors, and more. Next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. Danny Kanell, Tom Fornelli, Bud Elliott. I'm Chip Patterson. Let's start to get into this awesome matchup that we're going to have here in the Big Ten championship game between Oregon and Penn State. And let's begin with the Ducks. Bud, when you were tracking Oregon this season, was there a game or a moment where you started to really visualize that they might be able to finish the year as the best team in the country? Was there a point for Dylan Gabriel? What was it where you started to really start to look at Oregon in a different light, that they really could be that team?
So it's a great question, Chip. I think early on, Gabriel was struggling. They were trying to figure out what he could run, how he was different than who Bo Nix was, last year for the Ducks. It's still a lot of the underneath stuff, but I think now, his comfort in this offense is so much better. And I think it was really when they crushed those two teams midseason, Michigan State and I think UCLA, and they just totally put it in park in the second half. It was oh, they're feeling good now. Just shut it down, not show anything else. And they saved a lot of that stuff for the Buckeyes and broke it out against them. That's kind of when I was I think they got it right.
Yeah, I think the turning point for me as far as my belief in Oregon was early in the season when they were dealing with the injuries on the offensive line. They did not look good. Ohio State comes to Eugene, one of the best defensive fronts in the country, and they held up well. And, it was a close game. It came down to literally the final second for them to hold on to win the game. But just the way that offensive line performed in that game really gave me a sense that, okay, they're what we thought they were going to be. They're kind of reaching that point. They're peaking. This is a team that I feel like can go on and win this league.
I think it's obviously the Ohio State game, right? You're talking about the offensive line. What about the defensive line that showed up in that game? Remember, that was without Jordan Birch. It's what are they going to do? Then Mateo Uyunglele shows up and dominates that game, and they're able to get some pressure and shut down and contain Will Howard and all those offensive weapons. So that was the moment for me. I think that's probably everybody's wake-up calls this team is capable of beating Ohio State, who has this super roster that has fallen short of expectations. But still, at the time, that was the moment I think everybody was like, oh, this Oregon team is legit. They're for real, and they can absolutely run the table.
You know what I can't get over? I can't get over how I had unrealistic expectations for Dylan Gabriel in this offense. You know, we're just here in this just add water scenario where it's like, I don't know, he's a ninth-year quarterback. Of course he'll figure it out. And early on, I mean, Tom, you wrote about it for CBSSports.com. There were red zone turnovers that were very worrisome. You know, we talked about the offensive line coming along. I mean, Danny, it's crazy that a quarterback might get better throughout the course of the season. I feel like that's what we've seen from him.
I mean, there aren't many NFL quarterbacks where it's their job that just step in year one in a new system and just crush it, right? They're not going to be the same, and then they get better year two. I think what's been really impressive is the incremental improvement from Dylan Gabriel. And some of those red zone interceptions, I almost felt like he was kind of seeing what he could get away with. You're thinking continuity with the receivers. I mean, when we were talking about Bill Belichick earlier, when you talk about attention to detail, that's what makes the best offenses, the best quarterbacks, the best. And when those details are a little bit off, it's glaring. But as they've gone along, he's gotten more comfortable, timing, rhythm. The offensive line has gotten better. He's felt more comfortable. And Will Stein has done a great job of building an offense that fits his skills. I thought the most impressive thing was that the playmaking ability that showed up in the Ohio State game, the game that he had to. That's what I'm curious. If that shows up this weekend, if he's pressured, he is more mobile than we probably give him credit for. He made some plays down the field outside the pocket, became more of a playmaker, where most of the other games, he's been more of that role of game manager. And I mean that as a compliment because he hasn't had to do much outside the pocket as a pure playmaker.
You know, last year he did show that one other time against Texas in the Cotton Bowl. Remember, Texas was not spying him at all. They were playing a lot of man coverage, and then he's like, well, if you're not going to cover me, I'm going to go. And that's kind of the same thing he did against Ohio State.
Yeah, it's been a very interesting situation to watch just how they have evolved on the season because I was calling Dylan Gabriel left-handed Bo Nix. It's like you were saying, just plug and play, ready to go. But he did need his time to get to learn his new offense, his new teammates, the system. And then Will Stein, I think, needed time to get to know Dylan Gabriel because their strengths and weaknesses are similar, but what they like to do might not be the same thing. So he had to figure out how to mold his offense around what his quarterback feels comfortable doing and what he's best at. And I think that ever since they figured that out in about the fifth or sixth game of the season, they have been on cruise control.
I think that it is a simple question with a simple answer. Is Dylan Gabriel the kind of quarterback that can win the Big Ten championship? That's yes. I mean, they're a 3.5-point favorite here on this field against
the
Penn
national
State.
championship.
I was going to say, we at one point had an idea in our mind of what a national championship winning quarterback looked like. You know, I mean, it was going back to the fighter pilot and the bus driver, the Jag Plus. I mean, all the different ways that we looked at quarterbacks. Maybe Stetson Bennett broke the mold. I don't know. But for Dylan Gabriel, he is the quarterback that you could see not just winning this game, but then going into the college football playoff, winning in the quarters, the semis, and the national championship?
Has he been the most consistent quarterback in the country? I mean, everybody's had their ups and downs.
All right, so Cam Ward's the most productive,
down
but
the stretch.
But he's a little
flaws.
squirrely, right? I mean, he likes to take shots at sometimes, and he can get himself in trouble. I just feel like he's the most consistent, the most reliable, as far as you know what you're going to get. And that is really comforting for any head coach and offensive coordinator to feel like, you know what, if I don't call a perfect play, he's either going to make a play outside the pocket or he's going to throw it away or he's going to take a sack. He's not going to throw an interception. He's not going to throw a pick six. Like, he's the most trustworthy quarterback that I think is in the game.
Yeah, and it's going back to what you're saying, Chip. Like, he's not Joe Burrow. He's not Tua Tagovailoa. He is not your first-round NFL draft pick. If he was, he wouldn't be playing for Oregon this weekend. He'd have already gone on to the NFL. But what he is he's a very good college quarterback. He's very experienced. He's a veteran. He knows everything that's coming. There's nothing a defense can throw at him at this point that he hasn't seen in his career. He's been playing for 5 years now. So he is exactly what Oregon needs because you look at that roster up and down, it's a very talented team. It's one of the most talented teams in the country. They don't need a superstar quarterback to win. They just need a guy who can get the job done, and Dylan Gabriel is very much a guy who gets the job done.
Also, I think the way we frame it's important, right? Like, is Dylan Gabriel a guy who could win a national championship as a quarterback last year? No. But, like, this year, the quarterbacks just nationally are not that great. Like, Beck has not played up to expectation. Ewers has been okay. Howard for Iowa State has been very up and down. Like, your top NFL draft quarterbacks aren't even in the college football playoff for the most part. Right. Mm-hmm. So, like, it kind of depends on the year. Maybe the year Stetson Bennett won it, yes. Last year, no. The Joe Burrow year, no. The year that it was like Fields and Trevor Lawrence, definitely not.
Yeah.
Right? But, like, if he's the best quarterback in the playoff, of course he could. And I think he might be.
You know what else they've done is they've given him a great supporting cast too. Because I don't think if he's at Miami, I don't know if he's winning as many games as Cam Ward did. Because Cam Ward does these, he can put the team on his back, and at times I think Dylan Gabriel can. But I do think the fact that he's got exceptional weapons on the outside, that he's got an offensive line that's gotten better, that he's got Jordan James in the backfield, that he's got a defense that he can trust, it's been the perfect marriage. I think that's why they went out and spent to get him. I think that's why they brought in Dante Moore for the future to help him groom and watch him and learn from him. I think it's been a great fit for these two together.
It is very Oregon that we haven't even talked about the defense yet at this point, but this defense has done a terrific job, and to me, Bud, it really does start with the roster construction. You've got players like Mateo Uiagalelei, who with a bunch of tackles for loss, a lot of big-time plays. That was coming out of high school. But then you got Derek Harmon, who you got out of the transfer portal. Jabbar Muhammad, a good lockdown corner, you got out of the transfer portal. When you're looking at this defense right now, do you see it as a real strength, not only for this game, but really as we spin it moving forward?
I do, and honestly, Oregon's defense carried it for most of the season. Even as the offense was figuring out, especially with the offensive line injuries, the defense is we got you. Don't worry about it. We'll keep getting the stops. If you look at this, they went out and they went shopping for big-time defensive linemen on the interior. They took Michigan State's best player. They took Houston's best player. And that sounds great. It sounds like it's guaranteed. Y'all, it's not guaranteed. Those guys bust also. And if you bust on a transfer portal kid, there ain't no second bite at that apple. You're just kind of SOL. So ultimately, the fact that they hit both those guys, they stayed healthy, they've been impact players, that's huge. Oregon's defensive interior is as good as basically anybody in the playoff.
Yeah, and it's not the defensive line gets a ton of credit, and it should because it is filled with talented players.
Oh, yeah, and Jordan Burch, too.
Yeah,
He's going to be an NFL player.
Exactly. But the thing about this defense is they're good at every level. They've got a great defensive line. They've got good linebackers. They're solid in the secondary. So when you're trying to figure out a way to defeat it with your team and you're an offensive coordinator, there really isn't that one weak spot where you sit there and say, okay, that's what we're going to attack. That's what we can crush. It doesn't exist, which just makes it all the more difficult to beat them.
Have we seen anybody in this country have a game where they had 10 sacks and 16 tackles for loss? Because that's what Oregon did last week against Washington. Yeah. That is insane. I had to double check the box score. I'm like, how did this happen? But that's the type of talent they've got. I think the bye week was huge for them. The week before, they come in, they're rested for this game. It's setting up perfectly for the Ducks.
We are not going to allege the Wisconsin Badgers as offensive juggernaut, but that defense, to your point, might have saved the season. Being able to step up when you're on the road in their 8th game in a row, the offense isn't clicking. It's Madison is going crazy. That defense saved the day and made sure that there was still a 0 in the loss column. Well, coming up on the other side, we turn our attention from the Ducks to Penn State. What are they going to bring to this stadium, and what can they bring to the college football playoff? A deep dive into Penn State and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. That's Danny Kanell, that's Tom Fornelli, that's Bud Elliott. I'm Chip Patterson here in Lucas Oil Stadium, site of the Big Ten Championship. It'll be Saturday night between Oregon and Penn State. And Danny, let's get into those Nittany Lions because, this is a little bit of a surprise, right? You knew that you needed to beat Maryland to at least be in this position, but somebody got the word down to the sideline because after a slow start, they just laid the hammer down on the Terps in a way that made them look very much ready. Did they technically backdoor their way into this? Yes, but they absolutely looked the part. They have been a Big Ten title contender all season long. What's impressed you about Penn State here in 2024?
We've come a long way since James Franklin at home losing to Ohio State, going off the field and getting into it with some Penn State fans who were like, get him out of here, get him fired, and yet here he is with a chance to win a Big Ten championship. The resilience they've shown to be able to bounce back from that game, to be able to keep their main goal in reach is pretty impressive. And I think it's been kind of your prototypical Penn State team under James Franklin. You've got decent quarterback play. I'll say that out of Drew Aller. I'm sure we'll get more into that. You've got a good run game. You've got a great defense. I mean, this is what they are. And I think an identity in college football is massive. A lot of teams go searching for it. They're trying to become something different. And I know they've tweaked things and they've gotten a little bit more explosive as an offense with a new offensive coordinator. But the bottom line is this is the way this team has won. They've been built, and I think they'll go as far as Drew Aller can take them.
Yeah, it's weird. The way you think about Penn State, or at least the way Penn State is discussed in the national narrative, is a lot of the focus is put on the fact that they can't beat Ohio State to save their lives. And they lost that game earlier in the year, and you kind of write them off. But what's lost in all of that is they're still a very good football team. Like, they only lost one game all season, and if you go back to that Ohio State game, it's not as if Ohio State was crushing them. That was a very difficult game that they had a chance to win. So I look at this team as a complete team. I think offensively they do not have what Oregon has at wide receiver, but on the offensive line, I think they've been solid all year. They have a good run game. They have a great offensive coordinator in Andy Kotelnicki, who's able to scheme things up for him. And I think defensively they're phenomenal. Like, at every single level on that side of the ball, they have a stud or multiple studs, and that is going to keep them in any game against anybody, because it is really tough to move the ball and put up points on this team.
Totally. I'm very curious to see how do they create explosive plays against Oregon. Right? I don't know that Penn State is a team that can consistently drive the football, go slow. When they played your Illini, like on a success rate basis, they dominated Illinois, but on the scoreboard basis, they did not. And why? Because Illinois tackled the heck out of Penn State in that game. Like, Penn State created a lot of 5- and 6-yard runs, but they got their guys on the ground. Like, Singleton is going to have to bust something in this game, or Kotelnicki's going to have to find a way, to scheme Tyler Warren or somebody else wide open. So I think you have to create a couple freebies and a couple home runs if you want to beat the Ducks.
And that's where I come back to Drew Aller. Like, I think he's got a lot of pressure on him. Again, I think he's been decent to good. He needs to be great in this game. He needs to make plays when they're not there. He needs to scramble, get some of those big yards. I mean, I go back to USC. That felt to me like a breakout game for him. Remember, there was a 4th down. They needed a conversion, final drive, scrambles out, throws it down the field. That to me was like, oh, he's capable of that. And yet it just hasn't been there consistently. And in the biggest moments, last year and this year, it feels like he shrinks on the big stage. He's going to have to rise to the occasion against this team.
When we were here over the summer, we were talking to James Franklin down in the field, and he was talking about Drew Aller's touchdown-to-interception ratio.
25-2. I bet a lot of people would like 25-2.
Exactly. But my thought was I would like to see a few more interceptions. While that seems weird, because I would like to see Drew take bigger chances instead of always playing it safe. And I think at times this year he has done that. But like you said, there are moments where he's very up and down in that. I think in the USC game, he was taking chances that weren't there. He threw a couple picks because of it, but I was happy to see it because I want to see him be more aggressive because he is very talented. He can move. He's not a statue. He's got a good arm. He's got throws that he doesn't often unleash that I feel like he should try to fit into tighter windows. He sometimes waits for things to be a little too perfect. I would like to see a bit more aggression.
Do you think that this is a Penn State offense that is ready to win in the red zone? Because we go back to that Ohio State game. I mean, how many times did you have the ball inside the 10, inside the 5, and the inability to punch it in for that touchdown? You go in a one-score loss, and all of those possessions feel so significant. I mean, what's going to be the key for Penn State to be able to do that?
I think you probably do have to get Drew involved in the run game some. Maybe you want to go a little more Tyler Warren Wildcat, but also, like, that's such a small sample set of plays, and sometimes it's just paper, rock, scissors, man. Ohio State threw rock when you threw scissors. Like, I don't hate the play that they had schemed up to slip the ball to Warren in the flat there with the offset tight end and the with the 2 tackles on the same side. Like, that's a cool play. It's a play a lot of teams run successfully in the red zone. Sometimes the opponent just has the right call for what you call. But I think the concerning thing was their inability to move the ball in short yardage there down by the goal. And like, Ohio State stuffed them. And now without Donka, the right tackle, like, I know that they don't think that the drop-off is huge, but it's not nothing. And Oregon's going to be the second best defensive line, I think, that Penn State will have faced this year.
Let's go to the SEC for red zone struggles. We'll talk about Texas, who's playing Georgia. This is a team that has struggled to score in the red zone as well. What did they do last week? They bring in Arch Manning in the red zone. Penn State has Bo Pribula. They can bring him in the red zone as part of a special package with him and Tyler Warren in the backfield. If you're Oregon, you're Tosh DePoy sitting there looking at that. Those two come on the field. I guarantee you're going to waste at least one timeout because you have absolutely no idea what's coming. I wouldn't be shocked to see if Penn State does something similar in this game.
Bo Pribula, he got some good reps last week, even though Mike Loxley didn't like him running the offense. He still got some work in.
Mike Loxley had some words for James Franklin. All right, let's get into the narrative here. You think James Franklin can win the big one? Like, it's so funny because with this matchup, who's got more to gain? Who's got more to lose? Like, it doesn't really feel like there's a lot to lose for either one of these teams. They're both going to be playoff teams. They're either going to be in the quarterfinal or hosting a first-round playoff game. They are both going to enter with a chance to go compete for a national championship. But, I mean, Danny, would this win reverse a lot of the conversation around James Franklin?
I mean, that graphic that is on the screen right there is about as bad as it gets, right? I mean, 1-16 versus top 5 opponents. This is another opportunity to get it done. I know you had Ohio State at home, but neutral site where I think you'll probably have more Penn State fans here. You've got a team that feels built to win. I think this is one he's got to have. I do feel there's clearly more pressure on James Franklin. No one's really talking about them potentially, if they win, being the number 1 seed, which they might do if they win this game. I think he absolutely can. Like, I think we get caught up as fans so much in this. And you mentioned earlier about not having the success against Ohio State. Like, Ryan Day has 47-1 against everybody else except for Michigan, and that's his bugaboo. Like, he can't get past them. So everybody kind of has their narratives. The only way to change it is to get one of these wins. And I do think that if he does get a win like this one, I mean, he's won a Big Ten championship already, but, like, I think if he gets this one, it does kind of take a weight off the shoulders, and you can start changing the narrative, but you have to do it first.
Yeah, it is weird because you look at that record that he's had against top 5 teams, and there's two sides of the argument. It's like, well, it's tough to beat a top 5 team. That's why they're ranked in the top 5.
Right.
But then you sit there and you see, but maybe you should probably get more than just one win in 17 tries, especially when you are the coach at Penn State and you are one of those programs that is supposed to be one of those top-tier teams. So I do think there's a lot of pressure on him, but I do think that if in another way, there's really no pressure because they're not supposed to be here. Like, this was supposed to be Ohio State versus Oregon. Nobody thought the Nittany Lions were going to be in this game, so they've got nothing to lose. They've got everything to gain. They can get a conference title. They can get the first round bye. They could possibly get a number 1 seed, and if they lose, they're still getting a playoff home game. They're going to get another bite at the apple. So I think you can take it from that side too.
1-15 against top 5 teams is not great, but on the other hand, if you play 16 games against top 5 teams, that means you're not getting fired. You're staying around. You're doing a really good job at being a really consistent, quality football program. And I think with the transfer portal and NIL and how the talent is spread out so much this year, Penn State is still playing at the level that they normally play at, which typically was like just outside that top 4, just outside that top 5, just narrowly missing the playoffs. In fact, they would have made the playoff more often than any other team who had not made it during the 4-team era. I think the rest of the sport has somewhat come to Penn State, though. Like, this Oregon team, from a power rating standpoint, is not as good as your typical national champion, neither Georgia or Texas or anybody. So Penn State, to me, is still sitting there as like a 20 from like a rating standpoint, and Oregon's not a 30 or like a 32. They're kind of mid-20s. So I think the sport has kind of come to them. So Penn State, just keep doing your thing. Eventually, you're going to get another one.
You know what I think needs to be noted is how many times in that 1-16 record do you think Penn State was favored? Because most of the time it was probably against Michigan or Ohio State, and they were underdogs a majority of those times. When I know some of these coaches have great records, but a lot of times they're favored. They're supposed to win because they have more talent. Like, most of the time, to your point, power rating, Penn State is behind a lot of those teams they've been playing against. So I think that should be noted as well.
I've been so impressed with James Franklin and his program and what he has done to establish an identity, because not a lot of programs will switch out your offensive coordinator and your defensive coordinator and still be able to maintain. Because the Penn State program that has been good enough that if we had the 12-team playoff all through the years of the college football playoff, they would have a half dozen playoff appearances. They've always taken care of business against the teams they are better than. And yes, they do bump their heads against an Ohio State or against a Michigan, but they don't have that head-scratching loss to a 6-6 or a 7-5 team. Like, they are who they are. So many times we would look at a program, and when you change out both of your coordinators, we'd be like, well, they might take a step back. And instead, they have seized this opportunity. They have said, we are going to still be ourselves, even with all the turnover. I think that speaks to James Franklin being able to dictate to his coaches and being able to dictate to his team, like, this is what we do and this is how we win. I think it's been a good season for James Franklin.
He's also a great recruiter.
Yeah.
Like, no matter who's coming through, I mean, it helps to all those coordinators that you're able to give them really good players, and that's been always James Franklin's strong suit.
Yeah, I mean, he can recruit me. Just whenever I talk to him, it's like I want to go play for him.
Barton.
But no, I think that's a great point, though, because like you said, the way that they have gone through coordinators and they've still been able to maintain this level, I think it says a lot about James Franklin and the way he runs the program.
I also think there's kind of like a Goldilocks thing going on with the coordinators, right? They had Soraka, who got from Minnesota, was a little bit too simple. Then they got the Oklahoma State guy, Mike Yurcich, and that was a little too complex. And now I think it's just right with Kanell. It's been a nice little year one fit.
I love that. How are we here in Indianapolis before I hear the Goldilocks for the Penn State coordinators?
Gotta say something, week 15.
Yeah, that's fantastic stuff. All right, Bud. Penn State has to do blank to win the Big Ten title.
Win one-on-one plays down the field.
Is that like Harrison Wallace, who's maybe hopefully helpful again?
Dan Lanning is off that Nick Saban, Kirby Smart coaching tree. If they think that their corners can hold up against you outside, they will make you prove that they're wrong. And typically, like when you see a Nick Saban or Kirby Smart or Dan Lanning defense lose, think about Dan Lanning losing to Washington last year. They got roasted on the outside by those Washington receivers. And hey, guess what? We got 3 top 100 picks.
Yeah, I was going to say, you got Roma Dunze.
That Husky team, they weren't too bad. If I'm Oregon, I'm challenging Penn State. Say, hey, like we are going to bracket Tyler Warren. Can Harrison Wallace, can those guys on the outside beat our corners one-on-one? Or can Cuddle Nicky do a nice enough job of scheming it open with some of the play action stuff, some of the pick route stuff, to get some freebies and get some wide open shots?
I would say if I'm Penn State, the thing I have to do, that's probably my number one answer. I would say number 2, don't give up the big plays to Oregon. Make Oregon put together 9, 10, 11 play drives down the field and beat you in the red zone. Do not let Evan Stewart get over the top. Do not let Tez Johnson get over the top. And do not let Jordan James bust a bunch of long runs. Keep everything in front of you as best as possible. You'll give yourself a shot.
I think it's got to be a defensive-led effort. Like, I don't envision a scenario where Drew Aller's getting in a shootout with Dylan Gabriel and it's a game that's in the 30s. I just have a hard time envisioning that. So if you think Penn State can keep this thing, lower scoring, which I think they can. I think Tom Allen's a great defensive coordinator. They've got to disrupt Dylan Gabriel. That, to me, is priority number 1. Take away the quick pass game. Make sure he is uncomfortable.
All right, well, we will go inside the matchup with more of the Pass the Chalk, the matchup to watch. And Danny's hinting at a lower scoring game. Does that mean that his best bet is the under? All that and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network, getting you set for the Big Ten championship game between Oregon and Penn State. You can watch it on CBS, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday. You can stream it on Paramount Plus. All right, Tom. So we've looked at this. We've got all of our stats. We've got all of our spreadsheets. We've broken down the film. Take me inside one of your matchups to watch for this showdown.
I want to see what Penn State does in the secondary with their cornerback, A.J. Harris, who has spent most of his season working on the outside receivers, which is where Evan Stewart will be lining up for Oregon. I'm wondering if we see him put in the slot more often in this game to deal with Tez Johnson, because we've gone over the stats. When Tez Johnson is healthy, this Oregon offense is a lot better with him than it is without him. I don't think they will, but I wonder if there will be the wrinkle from Tom Allen to just kind of put that on there to try to limit Tez Johnson, or if he just feels like he's better off with Harris on Evan Stewart.
I like that a lot. I'm actually going to go with the tackling on Oregon's screens. If you look at it, how did Wisconsin hang around with the Ducks? Wisconsin's offense really didn't do a damn thing in that game, right? Wisconsin got the Ducks on the ground. They played through blocks on screens. They were more physical on the outside, and they limited the yards after the catch. And then they said, hey, Oregon, can you go score in the red zone, like we talked about? They rolled it, played red zone roulette, and they came out. I mean, they didn't win the game, but like as far as keeping Oregon from scoring 50.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you keep this Oregon team to 16 points, I would say that Wisconsin had the right defensive game plan to win that game.
100%. You have to get the Ducks, like, assuming Tom's plan is right, that they're not going to allow the ball over the top. The second part of that is you can't get 8 alive on these screens, right? You've got to get these guys on the ground, tackle well.
I would say it's Penn State's front 7. King and Rojas, the linebackers, have been really good against Jordan James, like against the run game for Oregon. Oregon feels in the last 5 or 6 weeks, and maybe it's because they haven't wanted to show anything and they just kind of want to take over games, and their offensive line has gotten better and they've been able to, but they have been, it seems, a little more run heavy later. And that's always, I mean, we just had the Ohio State-Michigan game, and it was the unbelievable stat that whoever's rushed for more yardage in that game has won it forever, it feels like. I think that, to me, is if Penn State's going to win, they've got to take away the run game, make sure it also contains Dylan Gabriel from rushing as well. By the way, it might be a prop that I like that we might do a little bit later. But I do think that, to me, will be the biggest matchup.
Who do you think wins first downs here?
I would lean Oregon. I just think that with Jordan James, you've got that kind of weapon, whereas you're going to be able to turn around and hand it off, and maybe not get 10 yards at a time, but just get the 3 to 4 yards to make sure you're staying on schedule, putting yourself in second down and manageable.
How do you define win? Is it like, are you hitting explosives on first down, or are you hitting like just staying ahead of the chains?
I'm thinking that when Oregon is facing a 3rd and long, I've got more confidence in Oregon finding a way to convert that.
Yes.
And I think that when Penn State is facing a 3rd and long, I think that they have less options or have to go deeper into the bag to try to figure out a way to convert that. And so, for both of those teams, especially for the Penn State side, like, you've got to find a way to get that 4-yard run, or that short pass to Tyler Warren. You've got to find ways to be able to put yourself in a position where Dan Lanning, Tosh Lupoy, this Oregon defensive staff, they can't all of a sudden figure out a way. It's like, and now we bring Jordan Birch hot off the edge to be able to really cause problems for Drew Aller in an obvious passing down type situation.
Counter to that, what if you try to go home runs and strikeouts? Right? What if if you're Penn State, hey, our drop back game on 3rd and long, it ain't going to work anyway. Okay, we're cool with 4 or 5 drives ending in punts. We don't want to throw picks in those situations. We'll run a draw, we'll run a screen, we'll punt, we'll get out of there, leave our defense. We've got to try to find a way to scheme up explosives, and we know pretty damn sure that's not going to come on 3rd and long, just given what we've seen through 14 weeks of the season. I think if I'm Penn State, I'm okay with 2nd and 10 if it means that I'm taking those shots down the field, try to create those explosives early on in this game. I probably need 4 touchdowns to win it. Right? Can I create those on first down? Is that where my explosives come from?
I trust Oregon way more in first down situations. I think they have more options available. I think you trust Dylan Gabriel. If they do call play action pass and decide to take a shot, if it's not there, he's going to get to his check down a little quicker, more confidently. He's got better weapons to work with across the board. I think it's no question it's Oregon on first down.
You mentioned Dylan Gabriel's legs. Doesn't it feel like they've been building towards being able to unleash some of that? He had a big run in the second half of the Michigan game, and talking to the team after the game, Dylan Gabriel said, he was like, yes, like we've been setting that up. And as soon as we saw what we wanted to see early when we did this, we knew that we were going to finally be able to uncork it.
Bud mentioned it earlier in the show. Last year when he was at Oklahoma, he rushed for 100 yards against Texas. He's got it in the bag. He hasn't had to use it because he's also had a lot of concussions in his history. So, you want to protect your quarterback, but when it comes to these stakes and you start getting closer to the championship, that's when you're willing to risk a little bit more. And as we saw in the Ohio State game, he was really dynamic just when nothing was there, when things broke down. That's when his escapability showed up a little more, his ability to throw on the run. Remember the one he escaped just a little bit to his right and then threw it down the field, took the shot, and scored a touchdown? That's where I think he's got that in his bag, and he hasn't had to show it because Oregon's been so good.
Yeah, Tom, one more thing that I'm looking at right now. We went into this season looking at Katron Allen, looking at Nick Singleton. Neither one of them are going to go. All right, they're both going to stay. This is going to be the most dynamic running back duo in the entire country. I feel like that's still there. I mean, they're still the same players. They've had injuries along the offensive line. Do you see them being able to shoulder a big part of the weight of this offensive responsibility?
I think they're going to have to.
Yeah.
I think that if you're Penn State, one of your strategies in this will be keep that offense off the field. And the best way we're going to be able to do that is with our run game, if we're able to move the ball consistently on the ground to extend our drives and stay on schedule. So I do think you can expect a healthy dose of those two. And as well as they play will probably be how far Penn State goes in this game.
Totally agree with that. I think if you look at it, how do you get the guys the ball in space, right? What Kansas did last year with Koto Nicki, with Devin Neal, throwing him the ball as well as high shot, I think you can probably see some of that in this game. I think they're pretty good at scheming up a way to get the ball to their best players, and their best players are not their receivers, right? Those are the guys you want to get it to if they're wide open. Cool. Find a way to scheme those guys open. Find a way to scheme the ball into the hands of your best players is going to be really key for Koto Nicki.
That sometimes in these type of games, it is those role players who haven't done, because you've got so much invested in this game. You're going to do everything to take away Tyler Warren. You're going to do everything to take away Singleton and Allen. Maybe this is a game where Rasheed Wallace steps up. I mean, I go back to the West Virginia, which was the first time we saw really the receiving presence really show itself, and it's been very spotty. I mean, Tyler Warren is clearly the best receiver on this team, but maybe there are matchups because you are bracketing Tyler Warren, dedicating so much to him that you've got to step up. And in this type of game, again, if it is lower scoring, it might be the difference in connecting on one or two big plays for 40, 50 yards.
It's so much fun. I mean, just the teams are awesome. And we are like breaking this down to the point where you realize, college football history is filled with these games where it's a punt return. It's this 1 3rd down conversion that can totally flip a massive, massive game with huge stakes and title implications. All right, we've done the schemes, we've done the systems, we've done the stats. Now it's time to put some money on the table. Our best bets for Oregon and Penn State and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. Well, we've gone all through Oregon, we've gone through Penn State, we've gone through matchups to watch, and now it's time to put some money behind it. So we, of course, for those of you who listen to us, who watch us at youtube.com/cover3, you know that our Locks episode for Championship Weekend is available. So let's bring that and maybe a few more props, maybe a few more side wagers as well. Danny, what are you eyeing for some of your best bets for this game?
I was just checking out my FanDuel app, getting on here, checking some of those props. I'm going to stick with what I've gone with kind of all the way on our Locks pod. I do like Penn State in this game. I think they keep it close. I like it with the 3.5. I wouldn't be shocked if they won this game outright. And I do like a little 2-for-1 special. You know what's my favorite? The way we've discussed this game, I like the under as well, like under 50.5.
You know, there's a trend. There's been 91 conference championship games since 2014. The winner of the game straight up has covered in 70 of them. So typically when it comes to a conference title game, just take the team you think is going to win to cover. I'm going to take Oregon minus 3.5. I do think they are the better team. I do think they're more likely.
Time out, because that is the most misleading stat I've ever heard, because we used to have divisions, and now we don't. And so we don't know if that will hold true. I like the way you packed your, you had to bring it in with a punch, but it is a little bit deceiving considering we've seen, Ohio State, Purdue, we've seen Michigan, Purdue, we've seen Ohio State, Wisconsin, 59-0. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. We've seen a lot. We've seen a lot of mismatches. All the games this weekend are really tightly matched, which I think is going to be awesome. I just had to pick apart yours since you're on the other side.
That's okay. It's fine. Oregon's still going to win and cover, and I'm still going to be right. But the prop I'm going to take for this one is we've talked about Jordan James. We've talked about how Oregon's going to want to run the ball. We're also late in the year. Guys are getting tired. You want to save them. You've still got, hopefully, 3 more games left if things go the way you want. So you're going to see him splitting carries. Give me Noah Whittington over 20.5 rushing yards. I think he's going to get more carries this week than he's typically been getting.
I like that. I'm going to go Penn State plus a half point in the first quarter.
Yeah!
It's a little sicko mode, I know, but if you look at Dan Lanning, he's still a very defensive-minded coach. And when they win the toss in big games, not against Colorado because that was different, but in the biggest games, when Lanning wins the toss, they defer. Washington twice last year, Utah, Ohio State this year, and that means Penn State's likely to get the ball first, right? 2 possessions for Penn State, 1 possession for Oregon in the first quarter. I think Penn State also, if they win, I think they will choose to receive because I don't really want to play Oregon from behind. I want to play a slower pace game about the nitty lines. I want to get out ahead, sit on that lead if I can. So Penn State plus a half point in the first quarter.
Do y'all hear this? I mean, America, are you listening? This man has tracked down Dan Lanning's coin toss behavior, okay? No one else is giving you that. Thank you.
I mean, there's not really... Guys, we've seen these teams for 15 weeks.
Yeah,
there ain't a whole lot of mystery to this stuff. I mean, we know what these teams are. Like there's some variants that'll play out in the game. Like you got to find little micro edges in week 15, unless you got 25 locks like DK over here.
Well, I'm still scrolling. I got some more props coming your way if we're ready.
But I think the key to what Thomas said is that while we have had some lopsided spreads, a lot of times these are close spreads. Mm-hmm. So that's why whoever wins the game is probably going to cover the spread as well. I think Oregon's going to win this football game, and so I'm taking Oregon. I'm laying the 3.5, and I'm also looking at some team totals. I think Oregon could go over 26.5.
Ooh, so you're all on the opposite side of me.
Yeah. We're going toe to toe on this.
You've crushed
one.
me all year, so hop on board with Chip.
Any other first quarter?
I had a first touchdown score. I think Tyler Warren at plus 700 is pretty good value, especially if you're talking about the way they get the ball. Remember the Ohio State game? They didn't go to him early on that one red zone possession. I just feel like they're going to try to find a way. He's their biggest playmaker. I think that's pretty good value. The other one was Drew Aller under 200.5 yards, passing yards. I don't again, I think it's going to be a lower scoring game. I don't envision Drew Aller all of a sudden figuring out that I can throw in the ball over the yard. I think they're going to do what they do, run the football, make him be a game manager, make sure he doesn't turn the ball over, and that would lead to a, under on his passing yardage total.
I like that.
Do you guys like Gabriel over 13.5 rush?
Yes.
You liked over?
Yeah.
So I have a question. This is a very novice question. Do they include sack yardage?
Yes.
Yes.
In college they do.
Then I like under, because I think Penn State's going to figure, and he is a guy who will take sacks. He's not going to throw it away.
But he gets the ball out so fast.
He does.
They throw so many screens. We saw that graphic here on CBS Sports Network where Oregon is dead last in the nation in air yards. The ball's out fast. If you've seen him without shoulder pads, there's a reason they don't run him much. He's smaller than all of us on stage. So,
Yes.
the guy is kind of tiny by elite college quarterback standards. But it's go time for y'all. They're trying to get that number one seed. I think they run.
He's smaller but not skinnier than Chip.
That's true.
He is, but he's got a bit more beef.
Yeah.
All right. Well, coming up on the other side, we'll turn our attention to some of the other conference championship games across the country, beginning with the SEC title game between Texas and Georgia. Next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network from Lucas Oil Stadium, site of the Big Ten Championship game, where Oregon will take on Penn State Saturday night. You can watch it on CBS. You can stream it on Paramount Plus. All right, we've gotten the full breakdown. We've gotten our best bets for that game. Let's turn our attention elsewhere, where it looks like Texas already has a lead on Georgia. Okay, so just recent news as we're sitting here talking, Justice Terry, who is a five-star prospect in the 2025 recruiting class, he was down to Georgia and Texas and a few others. He did not sign on Wednesday, National Signing Day, but did decide on Friday to commit to the Longhorns. So, Bud, am I correct? I don't have my math calculator on right now, but is that Texas number one on lock right now? And what should we know about Justice Terry?
That is Texas number one. Hook them for the number one class. I don't think they're really catchable right now unless there's some incredibly weird stuff were to happen. What should you know about Justice Terry? If you see this guy at a camp, be like, good Lord, God does not make it many folks at 18 years old who look like this. He's a freak, man. Strong, physical, great length, point of attack player. I think he'll play early for Texas. And really, with what Texas has done, reloading the defensive line of scrimmage, think about who they lost to the draft last year with Sweat and Murphy. And this year, Broughton stepped up, and because they keep signing all these elite five-star bodies and molding them in to good players, just another guy that I think will just probably crush for the Longhorns. And Texas there, as we see on the screen with 312 points, that's a substantial lead over Alabama, and obviously Georgia couldn't leap up to catch them because they didn't get Justice Terry.
Wow. Impressive stuff. Again, that happening just here on Friday. Justice Terry, five-star defensive lineman, committing to the Longhorns over Georgia and others. All right, now let's turn. That's the future, where it does look like Steve Sarkisian is just going to continue building that monster.
They're going to be all
Austin.
right.
Yeah, they're going to be all right. But they might not be all right here on the offensive line with Kelvin Banks' status up in the air. What would that mean if he's not able to go against a Georgia defensive front that ate Texas's lunch when these two teams played in Austin earlier this year?
Maybe it means more Arch Manning. I've kind of alluded to that a bunch of times on here when we broke down the game and talking about our locks. I think you could see him. They already sprinkled him in against A&M, and Quinn Ewers being so banged up, being limited with his legs because of that ankle injury. I wonder if that's what it means. But I do think this Longhorn offensive line as a unit, with or without him, has to have taken that game personally. And they look at that as a challenge and say, all right, what do we do to respond? Now that they've seen it, they've got a taste of what it's like going against Georgia. It almost felt like they were shell-shocked that first time around. I think they'll play better even if Banks doesn't go. I just feel like there's got to be some sort of pride. And I also think Georgia is not the same defense. For whatever reason, they have not looked as dominant. Maybe they work out some more motions. They're moving the ball around, getting the ball out of your hands quicker. And again, I go back to Haynes King for Georgia Tech. They had so much success with the running quarterback. I think that's something they might have up their sleeve as well.
You know, what worries me, anytime you lose somebody on your offensive line, if Banks doesn't play, it's never a good thing. But I've always I'd rather it be 3 weeks after the injury than the very first game after the injury, because playing together on an offensive line, you need time to gel, to figure out what the guys next year are doing, get things in order. And if you look at Texas on the whole this season, they haven't had injuries on the offensive line. So it's not like the backups have been able to come in and get a ton of experience and snaps. So you look at the situation where he's one of the best tackles in the country. You're going up against one of the best defensive lines in the country, a defensive line that already whooped your butt. And now you're playing in Atlanta, which is pretty much a home game for Georgia. It is going to be a very loud environment. And now you've got an inexperienced left tackle. You're going to see pre-snap penalties. You are going to see false starts that are going to put them in bad spots if he doesn't play. So it's not a good position to be in if you're the Longhorns.
I do think if you're Sark, though, you got a chance to see how Kirby Smart wants to attack your offense. And to your point, Tom, I fully agree. I think left tackle will be a problem. But Gooseby stepped in last week for Banks in a very loud environment against an NFL pass rusher in Scorton and was kind of fine. Like we didn't really notice it like that much. At one point I looked, it's like, that's not Banks. Like Gooseby's a little taller than Banks. Like Gooseby's in the game. He's holding up against Scorton just fine. I do think there's an element of like game scripting here where everything went perfect for Georgia in that first matchup. We give Carson Beck so much credit for threading the needle on that one throw that he made. But if he tries that throw 10 times, it's probably tipped and picked a couple times. Like, it just narrowly kind of snuck through there. That's to his credit. Great ball. But, like, I think if I'm Texas, I want to see that again. I want to see if Texas can tackle all these screens, or if Georgia can tackle all my screens perfectly again, because they got Texas guys on the ground really well in that matchup. And they had a favorable, like, down distance and scoreboard situation from which to play that Texas offense, because they got up so fast, big in that game. They just pinned their ears back and rushed the passer so well. I don't know that it plays out exactly the same way this week.
Danny, has Carson Beck gotten better, or has the offense gotten better? Take me through the roller coaster season that Carson Beck has had, because a 6-game stretch, the team goes 4-2. He's got like 12 interceptions in that 6-game stretch, 10 touchdowns, and then things seem to have flipped. So what have you seen in terms of Carson Beck's late season performance?
I think a lot of it was mental with Carson Beck, whether he was trying to force it, trying to do too much, wasn't seeing the field. But since that game against Ole Miss, when they got smoked and he had another 3-interception game, he's thrown 11 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. And I do think there is something about Carson Beck when he runs it just a little bit. Like, what game was it where it was a Tennessee game where he ran over the defender and kind of got a big first down and gave a big emotional. Like, I felt it kind of woke him up. And I'd like to see him even use a little bit of his legs early in the game just to get in the flow of it. But I ultimately think it is about him seeing the field more. He's gotten more comfortable. Oscar Delp, your guy, has kind of emerged as a red zone target. He's gotten more comfortable with his receivers. The other thing, too, and Carson Beck has taken so much criticism. You know who leads the country in drops?
Georgia.
Yeah, so I mean, his receivers have to do a better job, and I think they have lately, but they also dropped a couple balls against Georgia Tech. They haven't exactly fixed the problem, but I think Carson Beck has finally just relaxed, and he's not pressing as much as he was during that stretch where he was really bad.
And I think it's easier to relax when you don't have a defensive lineman in your lap every single snap. And I think the return of Tate Ratledge to their offensive line, who'd missed time in the middle of the season, coincided with when Beck was throwing all those interceptions and playing poorly. I think his return has steadied things on their offensive line. It has steadied things in protection, and it has given him more time in the pocket to operate and see things down the field. And I think he's just making better decisions because of it.
I'm not fully sold on Beck yet. If you look at what they did last week against Georgia Tech, obviously they had to come back. But why? Well, they weren't scoring any points for about the first 20 minutes of that ball game.
Down 17-0 early.
It was not until Georgia Tech had their top 3 cornerbacks leave the game with injury that Carson Beck just started taking all these screens and checkdowns, and Tech's backup corners, surprise, surprise, aren't good enough to tackle Georgia's starting skill guys. The downfield stuff for Georgia largely wasn't working. They were having to use Arian Smith because Colby Young is still out, probably won't be back until the playoff. They're using Arian Smith on more traditional routes as opposed to just like, kind of tricked up, deep shots and stuff, which is what he's decent at. He's not really a very good, actual playing the position of receiver as we've seen over 4 years. And he's got those drops, and Beck has some confidence issues with him, I think, obviously. Texas secondary is way better than the Georgia Tech backups. And I think if they try all the check down, just take what they give them type stuff against Texas, that's not going to lead to explosives out of those near often as it did last week.
That is a great point, pointing out that Georgia Tech, I mean, Carson Beck was awesome. He was slicing and dicing them, but they were out, 5 or 6 corners.
Yeah, their top 3 were done.
Yeah.
But how does this game go? Do you feel like you've got a sense for it? Like how this thing might play out?
I think Texas is playing better down the stretch than Georgia. I've just been more more impressed with them. I mean, Georgia struggled with Florida for a decent bit of that game. Obviously, the Tech game, I don't think having to come back against Tech with Tech's top 3 corners out is like that good of a win. You needed 8 overtimes, to get them. Meanwhile, Texas has been playing really well down the stretch. They hammered. I know it's Florida's backup third string quarterback. They hammered Kentucky, right? They take care of business last week, and in a physical way against a pretty good A&M team. I think Texas gets it done here.
I'm on Georgia. It's funny, we're talking about Carson Beck and how much better he's looked. I think we should talk more about Quinn Ewers and how, frankly, I think average Quinn Ewers has looked, at least compared to what you expect from him and what you would think in this offense. He's been banged up. He missed time earlier this year. I still don't think he's 100%. Just watching him, he doesn't look like he's at full capability. I think that limits what they can do offensively, particularly in the passing game. The downfield shots have kind of just completely disappeared. And when you look at the receivers that they have on that roster, it's like, why aren't they throwing to these guys down the field? I don't think it's because they don't realize they have them. I think it's because they don't trust their quarterback's ability to do it right now. So I think Georgia right now, just based on what they did in the first meeting, I don't think it's going to be anything like it was. I don't think they will completely overwhelm them the way they did in that game. But I think that they're going to win this one. I think that they're going to win the SEC.
I'm going to go with Texas. I think that defense has been so impressive. In much as we were talking about Carson Beck, I'm kind of with Bud. I don't know if he's completely fixed. He is playing freer, but this stage, how does it go if he gets pressure? What's interesting, too, about Texas, just talking about their offense, I know Isaiah Bond has been banged up, but they really haven't had that receiver, that go-to guy. And what I don't know is it they're missing the guys they had last year, or is it because Quinn Ewers is banged up? But Gunnar Helm has been their best, target. It's kind of like Penn State. They've got, and he's not even as good as Tyler Warren. So I just wonder if the limitations are there in the pass game. But again, I think Arch Manning, they're going to sprinkle more of him in with his legs, maybe even passing the ball as well, too. And I don't think it's a huge package. Maybe it's just 5 or 6 plays. But again, all these games, when you've got a point spread of 2.5 points, it could come down to 1 or 2 big plays. And we saw that in A&M. Arch Manning comes in for 1 play inside the red zone, rushes for a touchdown. That game was tight. That touchdown was huge.
Contravious Wisner is playing better.
Yep.
Down here at the end of the... And look, he's a young player, he's thrown into the fire. Cedric Baxter goes down. All of a sudden, the injuries are piling up. Your workload is... And the coaching staff has to figure out what they can give him, what he can go in there for. And I think he's playing better at the end of the season. And while the left side might be a concern if Banks can't go, that right side of the offensive line for Texas has gotten a good job of getting some push. If they can run the football with Wisner, I think that opens up a lot of stuff for this Texas offense. I'm fired up for this game. I lean Texas. It's a guaranteed lock. It's going to be the Texas Longhorns. Come on, don't come soft with it. But I think Texas wins this football game. Because,
I'm on an island.
Yep. I just think they've been playing better and more consistently down the stretch.
And Island with Kirby Sparks not a bad place to be. I think Wisner's seeing it too. He's actually seeing the blocking scheme now. You can tell. I think earlier in the year he was kind of guessing, and now he's trusting it, understanding like what kind of blocks he needs to read, and I think that's just made him so much more efficient.
Don't discount the motivation that is provided by banning Bevo from the Mercedes Dome. That is going to be their calling card after the game. Remember Kirby Smart when they went to Texas, we wanted to eat. What do you think Sark's going to say? They can't take Bevo out of our game. He's going to use that.
Yeah, listen. You watch. It'll happen. All right, coming up on the other side, we turn our attention to the ACC championship game. College football playoff implications, sure. But what about this matchup between Clemson and SMU? We'll get into all that and more next.
Finally, real football. Let's go.
Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network, taking you through a championship week as we sit here in Lucas Oil Stadium, the site of the Big Ten championship game between Oregon and Penn State, Saturday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. You can watch it on CBS. All right, let's turn our attention to Charlotte, North Carolina, as Danny Kanell calls it, real football, the ACC.
Let's go. Here we go.
Clemson and SMU, 2 teams that didn't get to play each other. We worked all of the doomsday scenarios of everybody finishes undefeated. That wasn't the case. Miami loses twice. Clemson loses to Louisville. But SMU did the thing. They seized on an opportunity of a weak conference schedule, or a favorable conference draw, if we're going to be a little bit more correct about this. But they're 8-0. And now they're playing to try to win the ACC in their first year of being in the conference. What has impressed you about SMU? What do they need to do in this game?
If Kirk Cignetti doesn't exist, Rhett Lashley's in the conversation for Coach of the Year. I mean, what he's done has been phenomenal. And I always thought SMU would be good eventually in the ACC, maybe year 2 or 3. To do it in year 1, and you mentioned, like, yes, Florida State's been awful. That helped them get a big win against Florida State. They didn't have to play Miami. They didn't have to play Clemson in the regular season. But they have still beat some pretty good teams. And I know they don't get credit for beating Duke because it's Duke, but Duke finished 9-3. That's a pretty good win. The thing that's impressed me is obviously we knew about Rhett Lashley as an offensive mind. I thought making the switch from a starter last year in Preston Stone, who was back, that's always a tough dynamic to do when you bench a starter, to make that decision saying, I think we can still get better. He does it to Kevin Jennings, and it works. But I also think their defense, maybe what we're not talking about enough, their defense has been really physical. They've been able to get up to speed as far as size and physicality, making the jump from the American to the ACC. I don't know, people would make fun of the ACC, but it still is a jump, and they have not missed a beat. And I think it's been really, really impressive.
Yeah, SMU's been making me feel pretty stupid all year. Like, in the offseason, I was with you. I didn't think they were going to just show up to the ACC and do what they have done. Clearly they have. They're favored in the ACC championship game. They didn't just get there. They're favored over Clemson, the program that has pretty much dominated that league for a few years. So every single week I feel like I was waiting, especially early in the year. I was like, all right, well, they're going to lose. They're going to fall off. It's going to happen. Then the BYU loss comes, and I'm sitting there thinking I'm really, really smart. There I am. I'm awesome. But they just keep winning. And Kevin Jennings, I think, has been a revelation for them. I think he has greatly improved that offense. You mentioned their defense. They don't get nearly enough credit for how good that they have played. But I do think this is a very interesting matchup for them because you mentioned the Duke win, which is a good win for them. It's also the best defense they have faced this season, and it was their worst performance on offense. They turned the ball over 6 times. Duke missed 2 field goals. That matters in a 1-point game. So going into this matchup against Clemson, which I think is a better defense, or at least on par with Duke as far as talent, it's going to be really interesting to see what Kevin Jennings and this offense are able to do against this team in this spotlight. Outdoors in Charlotte, might be cold, might be rainy. It's going to be an interesting situation.
There's no doubt their defense is better than we thought it was going to be. They have a lot of those guys who were good players on those old Manny Diaz Miami teams. Obviously, Manny kind of handed it to him there with Duke, and SMU got the win. But they have not faced a lot of, let's say, like better than functional offenses on the year. And I think that leaves open a question. It's weird to play a 14-game schedule, but they played Louisville. Who else do we think is like legitimately a functional offense they've played? Florida State was a total mess when they played them. They played Cal they got Cal without Mendoza. Mm-hmm. Duke's offense is pretty much hot garbage all year.
Pitt was about to fall off the cliff.
Pitt was about to fall off the cliff. They faced Boston College's backup Grayson James, and he actually handed it to him for about 3 quarters, and SMU ended up pulling away and winning the ball game. So there is a chance that this SMU defense is a bit of a paper tiger. Like, there's no doubt they handle teams that they destroy teams that are not functional offense, but Louisville scored it on them pretty well. Like, we don't really know how they're going to handle like a good to very good offense. I think Clemson's offense is, at least from a baseline standpoint, good.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Maybe their biggest win of last weekend was not having to face Miami's offense, because that could have been a shootout of epic proportions. Clemson's offense doesn't exactly. They've been better, and Cade Klubnik has been good, but again, they're not something that strikes a ton of fear in you.
Do they? Because Clemson's offense has a higher ceiling than what they have hit.
Yes.
A lot.
Yes.
And like, they've had offensive line issues. That means it's tougher to run the ball with Phil Maffa, which we always thought would be a battering ram, but sometimes that run game just disappears, as it did in their loss against Louisville earlier this season. Do you see Clemson having success against that SMU defense?
Depends on what Clemson you get.
I mean,
right?
like,
it's been such a roller coaster
Wesco,
ride, right?
Browningstool, like, there are so many
really
different
good
pieces.
It
just doesn't click all the time.
It doesn't, but if they do, that's when it gets dangerous. I think the key to this offense is Cade Klubnik's legs. Like, he's really kind of found something, and I think the big run against Pitt was huge. A 55-yard winning touchdown. He kind of gets loose a little bit. I think he's played more aggressively. He's played like a playmaker for a lot of the season. I think that's what SMU needs to be careful of. And it's funny because I think Clemson has to do the same thing with Kevin Jennings. But even in the potential game-winning drive that Clemson had, if you notice, a lot of those plays were Cade Klubnik scrambles just for a few yards, extending, getting first downs, extending plays. That, to me, is what's going to be the key. And what version of Cade Klubnik? He's been a lot better this year, but it hasn't been something that a lot of people have noticed because of the 3 losses.
I think Cade's one of those guys where the more he's running, the better he plays.
Yep.
Like I think it just helps him settle down somehow, get into the rhythm and flow of the offense when he's using his legs, whether it's by design or by scrambling. Like when he's sitting in the pocket and he's not being used as a runner, I feel like that is when he has been at his worst. That is not really where you want him. So I think it's going to be very important for Clemson to use him in that role early in this game, get him going, and just really test the limits of this SMU defense, because as you were saying, it's not as if they have gone through a barrage of high-powered offenses. Test the spot, test them all over, see where you can find the weaknesses, see where you can take advantage of, because talent-wise, Clemson has an advantage here.
And there is difference. Like our friend Bill Connolly calls it covariant, right? Some people are really good against bad and they smash bad, and when they face good, it's just a different thing. There are certain things schematically you can do against certain level of competition that you can't pull off against something else. And Clemson moved the ball kind of decently at times on South Carolina, which from a defensive line standpoint is probably the best in the country or damn near. SMU's got a nice D-line. Like they get after you pretty well. They can play aggressive, but they don't have the same body types that a South Carolina has. And Clemson held up against them a little bit better than I thought they would. So I do think Clemson can move and score.
You know what I'm looking at in this game? Because we make so much about Dabo Swinney and the transfer portal and how he doesn't use it. And he always comes back to his high school recruiting, his development, what we have coming up. Because TJ Parker is a sophomore defensive lineman who does a great job of causing problems for opposing quarterbacks. Sammy Brown is a freshman who's really emerged. Davion Terrell is a sophomore. I think that defense could be a big difference maker. The Clemson defense could be a big difference maker in this game.
They better tackle, because SMU is one of the top teams yards after the catch. I think they have 1,900 yards after the catch, and they like to get it in their receivers' hands, quick passes, get them on the run. Clemson has to tackle in order to contain that SMU offense.
Who, in your mind, has SMU faced defensively who has real defensive line bodies?
Louisville's not bad.
Right.
Yeah, Ashton Gelati. Yeah,
they handled that. Florida State, I'm going to go back to the FSU
Farmer
game.
was the healthy, right?
Farmer and Jackson were healthy. They actually they messed up SMU for about 40 minutes in that game.
Oh, BYU.
BYU did it to them, too.
BYU,
So we don't. One of our major worries was the offensive line questions for SMU entering the season. If we can go back to our preseason priors, which feels like forever ago. But again, I do think there's a difference in facing big-time defensive linemen. It's just not something you can really simulate or see in these other games. So there's a chance Clemson's guys step up and overwhelm SMU here.
Who wins?
I'm going Clemson.
Clemson.
It's an ACC championship game.
That's kind of where I'm at too.
Yeah.
There's some. This is what we do. This is who we are. We literally do it in this building, in this same Saturday night, early December, cold outside. I like. Think it'll be a home field advantage. I like the Tigers.
I hate this because I feel like we're doing what I hate what everybody does. Like, you're going with the brand. Like, they've got to be better. Although SMU is favored, I'm on Clemson too. I kind of want it to happen, though. I want a close Clemson win, and SMU is in.
And Alabama's out.
I didn't say that.
All right. Well, coming up on the other side, we know the college football playoff implications in the Big 12. It is win and in. So what are we looking for in that matchup between Arizona State and Iowa State? All that and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. So, Big 12 title game.
Yeah.
Win and you're in. College football playoff implications abound. We might have The Undertaker, got WWE involvement. I know we got Neo, lots going on. But what about Arizona State, Iowa State, for the Sun Devils? What has helped them be able to exceed the expectations? Because by Kenny Dillingham's own admission, this season, and the performance and the record especially, has exceeded his expectations. How have the Sun Devils been able to do it?
I mean, it sure helped to have Cam Scatterbo in the backfield.
Yeah.
I mean, he has been probably one of the breakout players of this season. It was interesting because we had Kenny Dillingham on the pregame show a few weeks ago, and he said when we're watching the team in training camp, he's like, I think we could be good, but you never really know. And especially at a program like that, when your win total is 4.5, there's probably even some self-doubt that creeps in there. They've gotten really good play from Sam Levitt, their quarterback, who's been really solid. Cam Scatterbo isn't awesome. Jordan Tyson, who I'm sure we'll talk about not playing in this game, has been huge for them. But I still think maybe one of the better stories is their defense, which has been fourth in the Big 12, only giving up 21.6 points a game. They've been really physical as well. And I think you got to give Kenny Dillingham a ton of credit. Again, we were talking about Rhett Lashley being the Coach of the Year candidate. Clearly, Dillingham would be as well. His energy has been infectious, his enthusiasm for his home team, like he grew up there right down the street from the campus, went there to school. That has been something that people have gravitated behind, and it's been awesome.
We've talked about it all year with the Big 12. It is a random number generator of a conference. Everybody is very similar week to week. You don't really know what you're going to get or who's going to win these games. And that makes it more important not to beat yourself. And I think one of the main reasons Arizona State has reached this point is they haven't beaten themselves. You saw in that graphic there a minute ago, during their 5-game win streak, they've got a turnover margin of +6. They're able to hand the ball off to Cam Scatabo. They run the ball a lot. He's very effective. That limits mistakes when you have a young quarterback. But with Sam Leavitt, when they have given him the ball and put the onus on him, he hasn't done stupid stuff that you see a lot of young quarterbacks do. He's been very smart. It shows he's well coached, and they're doing a very good job. And as you mentioned it, defensively, they don't give up big plays. They force turnovers. They make you work for every single point you get. And in a conference like the Big 12, you do that week in and week out. Next thing you know, you've gone from 2 wins to 10, and you're playing for a Big 10 championship.
I went out there this summer and saw Kenny in Arizona State, and saw him practice in spring, and he's like, we're way better, but 25 is probably more of our year. If you're doing like roster construction projection,
sure.
It's like we're way better than we were when we won 2 ball games. But they arrived a year early. They were very comfortable with Sam Leavitt. I think that's why they didn't really panic when Rashada left, to transfer to Georgia. But I also like how this team doesn't panic. They have played a lot of close games. They were down 2 scores to Texas State and came back to win that ball game. Like they really fought in a lot of these games. It certainly has helped that Utah and Oklahoma State, the kind of preseason conference favorites, have collapsed like crazy. That opens the door for a team like an Arizona State. But I think Brian Ward's done a great job with his defense getting stops. Like you mentioned, it's basically just run game and then scheming some explosives when you can. They don't ask Leavitt to drop back and throw the ball 40 times a game. And it's been a great formula for all these close games. And I like how they just don't panic.
Yeah, and because I'm not, this is going to sound like shade, but on paper, it was not a defense that we looked at with the names and the sizes and the ways that were like, this group is ready to go make a run at the Big 12 title. That's where you have to give the credit to the players, but then also to the coaching.
We also really didn't know what the baseline for this defense was, because if you recall last year, they were just so banged up on defense. They were one of the situations where just their lines of scrimmage were totally cooked. They were having to play walk-ons, pull guys from scout team. So it's like, they were clearly better than they were last year. How much better? That was hard for us to project in the preseason. They got a couple guys up front who were pretty good players.
Danny, we made so many Iowa State hype videos during this season.
Yes, we did.
And not necessarily for the good reasons either. But this Cyclones team has weathered the storm. They had that undefeated start, but then they drop a couple games, let one loss become 2, but they have steadied themselves. They had the massive win against Kansas State. Now they get an opportunity to win the Big 12 championship in their first 10-win season of the Matt Campbell era. What's impressed you about the way the Cyclones have sort of just ridden that roller coaster through the year?
They have one of the best cultures, I think, in maybe all of college football, what Matt Campbell has brought. And who was it? Was it, excuse me, Brees Hall, who said 5-star culture? Excuse me. I think he's brought that and then some.
I think when you look at this program and what Matt Campbell has been able to do, it is very impressive because they have an identity and they stick to it and it works for them and it has been very effective for them. Even, in prior seasons when maybe they're not winning 10 games, this is still always a very tough out in the Big 12. You see Iowa State on your schedule. It's not exactly a game you're looking forward to playing because you're going to be in for a tough time if you want to get out of there with a win. And most teams this year haven't been able to do it. They are balanced on offense. Rocco Becht has played very well at quarterback. They have a strong run game, and they have a very good defense that, again, it limits the explosive plays. They're happy to let you play red zone roulette against them because they feel like they can do a good job of holding you to field goals, and they've done a very good job of that all year, and now they're here.
They also did a nice job of weathering the storm of those linebacker injuries early. That was like Iowa ran the ball pretty well, and they found a way to win that ball game. If you look at their rushing stats, I think they're in some ways a bit misleading because they're so good in the passing game stats. The teams were like, these linebackers are out, we're going to run the ball right at them. But now they're starting to get some of those guys back healthy. Their rush defense looks a little bit improved, and I think they're going to throw everything they have at Scatabo and its Arizona State offense and make Arizona State beat them through the air, which could be tougher without Jordan Tyson, their stud receiver, who's now hurt.
And their rush defense has been so bad most of the season, it will help that they don't have to worry much, or it can at least challenge Arizona State and say, good luck, find somebody else that's not Tyson, make him beat you. Guarantee they will load up that box and stack it and say, good luck.
But he might be able to do it.
Right.
I mean,
exactly.
Of all the individuals that we are looking at across all of Conference Championship weekend, Ashton Genty, obviously, Boise State's another one that comes to mind, and maybe it's just because they're both running backs, but Cam Scatabo is carrying this team and carrying this offense in a way where if Arizona State goes and wins this game, then he is the most valuable player of that Big 12 title game. He'll get the WWE title belt and get to hold it up. I'm excited as a college football fan for the opportunity to see greatness. It is something that we get to see on these big stakes games every single season. And the way that Cam Scatabo, this is such a soft factor, but tell me if I'm wrong. He runs mean. He runs angry. He is a competitor. He is out there looking to just put his all into it. I think we've got potential superstar stuff coming from the Arizona State running back.
I also think you'll see Sam Levitt's legs. Ooh. He's a pretty good athlete, and they have not wanted to run him a lot this year, but if Iowa State has to kind of shake it up and they have to defend the run a little differently than they have been, as Danny was suggesting, then maybe they have to play more man than they want to. And that opens up the opportunity for quarterback scrambles. I could see Levitt having a nice rushing game.
The other thing, too, is Cam Scatabo can catch the ball. He's the second leading receiver on the team. They find ways to get him the ball, and they're going to have to do that. Maybe you slip him out on a screen. If they bring pressure, that's always a great play call. If they bring pressure, that whole blitz comes, and you just dump it right over the top and slip him out, you can get big play potential that way.
Who wins?
Again, I find myself at this point in the season, you find teams you start to root for, and I like both of these teams. I feel like Arizona State is the hotter team. I'll stick with them, but man, my favorite play is the under in this game. I do. What was the stat you had on the Big 12 championship games?
It's 6-1, I believe, the last 7 years.
Because it was gone. Then they had the Baylor TCU disaster, and they're like, okay, now we need one true champion, so we can have somebody to send to the committee.
And I think both these teams will be clean. Both quarterbacks are pretty smart. They're not going to give you a lot of turnovers. Pick six potential doesn't feel like it should be there. And I do think the defenses are going to shine, especially with Arizona State's concern about them generating offense.
I have no idea. I flipped a coin on the show the other day.
That's right.
What did it come up again?
It was my name played on the USGA card.
No, I know, but what was the pick?
Arizona State.
Arizona State. All right, I'll ride with
Arizona
you on that
State
one,
simply because that's the way the coin flipped.
I'm going to go Cyclones. I like their receiving core. I do think they have a really nice quarterback there. Without Tyson, that limits the explosive capability for Arizona State. And I like Scatabo a ton, but I think Iowa State's a better team. And you get them, they're almost a weird northern bad weather team that's now suited to play in a great environment because they can chuck it around so much, those explosive playmakers on the outside. Yeah,
Noel and Higgins, those 2,000-yard receivers, that's one of the reasons. And look, I talked about Cam Scatabo. If Rocco Becht has it in him, he's got it in his DNA to go out there and play tremendous. He could also throw it to the other team twice, but he has it in him to go out there and have an incredible performance. I'll take Iowa State as well. Well, coming up on the other side, let's open up the board. Let's maybe even bring in some friends. Best bets for Conference Championship weekend. All that and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. Pleased to be joined by Sportsline's Mackenzie Brooks. Mackenzie, we had to get you on because when you were last on the Cover 3 podcast, Locks Pod, you did drop 3 winners.
I did do that.
Because of our schedule adjustments to be able to get here to Indianapolis all together, you didn't get a chance to celebrate as much. So now we get a chance to hear from some of your best bets for Conference Championship weekend.
Yes.
What are you liking this week?
Now I get a chance to brag, and I get to do it on the field. So this is better. This was worth the wait. I like a lot of plays you guys have already talked about. I do think Penn State can cover this game, maybe even win outright for a lot of the reasons other people have been talking about. Love that we're getting a 3.5 here. I got a couple player props in this game that I'd like to talk about, if that's okay here. I think we get Aller under passing yards, and not because I don't think Penn State can win. I literally just said they could, but I think the game script is eat the clock, is stick to the run. If this is a shootout situation, that is not a situation that Penn State is winning this football game in. So I think we'll see a lot on the ground. I think that's exactly what they need to do to slow down this team, and that's why I like his under yards. And I like little Dylan Gabriel interception here. Ooh. Yes. I did say that. 3 of his last 4 road games has an interception. I think this is the type of stage where you see it come out of him, and I think there will be a lot of pressure on him, not a lot of time for him to get the ball out. So I could see a few mistakes. It's a big stage, okay? Could see interceptions for both sides. I'd like to parlay that together potentially.
A little double interception parlay for
little
both
chaos.
of them? Yeah, thoughts?
I do like that interception idea. I'm probably going to tail you on that one. I mentioned it earlier in the show. I'm on the Noah Whittington over 20.5 rushing. I do think Oregon's going to go deeper in the bag at the running back depth chart, and I just like Oregon on the spread. I think they're going to win.
I already bet Gabriel over rushing yards. I think this is one of the games they'll probably use him, from that standpoint. So if you like that, maybe you also like Gabriel rush touchdown, anytime touchdown type thing in the red zone could work.
Would you go with Tyler Warren anytime touchdown, or would you just want to go for the value of plus 700 for first? That's
exactly what I was going to say, Chip. How about we just do it with the first touchdown? I like first touchdown. I was looking at the touchdown market. If you're on even money, I don't like minus money either on a touchdown prop, so I'm more into those. And some other players, outside of that game, if we want to go a little further.
Yeah.
Let's see. ACC. Now, let's go to the Georgia Bulldogs. Are you kidding me? Okay, I don't want to talk about the spread because my thoughts on the spread do not correlate with my fandom. So we're going to go to Lawson Lucky here. Our sweet little tight end, okay? The targets are up. Just in general, his usage, all the tight end usage, they've run some 3 tight end sets as well. So I think he could go over his receiving yards. I like the receptions, but last time they played Texas, he had an explosive, 20-yard gain, and then the second reception, he had a loss of 3. So I think it's possible. I'd rather go maybe longest reception, Arian Smith. I know he's someone you've talked about, too.
Every big game, I bet Arian Smith
over 20.5.
You remember the halftime speech that Kirby gave before the Tennessee game when they whipped him 2 years ago in the rain? It's like, Arian, this is your time. Like, this should be there's to go back to mean, median, deviation, right? Like the mean yards is going to be lower, but the median is going to be higher because the way he catches the ball. He can't really play receiver. They just throw him deep shots off play action and nonsense. So I'd rather bet Arian over 20.5 for longest than over 40.5. Because he's probably not the intended screen guy after what happened last week. Yeah,
I'm with you. I have this terrible, it all ended up fine, but watching one of the many overtimes in that Georgia Tech game when he just dropped the ball in the end zone, I physically fell to my floor in my family room. I was like, that is what's engraved
Kirby probably
in my
wanted
head.
to move back to the 30 so he could throw him a deep ball.
Exactly.
Are you not worried about Oscar Delp snaking any of those Lawson Lucky targets, receptions, or yards?
I am not, and I thought about that.
This is an Oscar Delp podcast.
But I think this is just because he has the ability to have an 18-yard reception, and that's what I like about Lawson Lucky, and that's the way they've been using him. So I think he is the better for receiving yards. Yes, maybe receptions you could go Oscar, but I think receiving yards I still like Lucky. It's a great name, by the way.
Georgia always gets guys with these names: Lawson Lucky, Ladd McConkey,
Cash Jones.
Cash Jones is an all-timer.
Yeah. That is a best bets team. If you could parlay Cash Jones and Lawson Lucky, I kind of think that you would break the matrix right there. All right, before just a little bit, we're going to get to the full national title odds board. See if you got any leans or looks there. But any other player props or best bets from across all of championship weekend?
Well, I think even tonight, I like some plays tonight. If we want to go into a little Friday night lights here, I'm going against the public here with a Tulane Army over. Now, I understand what we're working with here, okay? Weather conditions not in our favor, but it's hard to tackle in the cold, too. And I don't think we really talk about that enough. It's a ground game. Tulane runs the ball 70% of the time. Army runs it 83% of the time. But they're still averaging 35 points per game, 40 points per game. They're putting up points with a run offense. And now it just makes it harder to tackle. It makes it a lot harder to tackle anybody. So I think it only helps the over, and I like that the public will probably continue to steam this down a little bit.
Is it
rocking 45.5?
45.5. Okay. If we could get the national title odds real quick.
Let's take a look.
Before we do that, Mario Williams overs. He was hurt early in the season. This is a USC level athlete who's gotten a lot healthier. Target share has been way up the last 4 games. I think early and often to Mario Williams.
All right, Mackenzie.
Yes.
We've got now co-favorites to win the college football playoff, Oregon and Texas, now both at 350. Looking at this board right now, where do you think there could be some value? What kind of ticket would you want to have in your pocket heading into the playoff?
So both of those teams could find themselves in the 5 seed. Now, I am betting on whoever gets that 5 seed to win the national championship. Oregon, I think it's a better route. Penn State would be great. Texas, it could be Texas if Georgia upsets them this weekend in Atlanta. So whoever that 5 seed ends up being, I just think the path is so much better than being that 1 seed, playing the winner of a likely Ohio State, Tennessee. That's the reward for being number 1 in the country. That's the big gift for being the number 1 seed, is you go into a likely pick-em game on a neutral site. That's the big gift. I'd rather be double-digit favorites in the first round, well over double-digit favorites in the second round. The second round against Boise is even easier than the first round. You'll probably be even bigger favorites. So I understand it's 2 games versus 1, and it's injury risk. Army-Navy weekend's a bye week. You know what I mean? If you're practicing hard enough to play, everybody's injury prone. So at what point is it rust versus rest? I don't know how much value that bye week at the top 4 seeds really will be.
Are you worried at all that Boise gets the 3?
Because then Clemson
wins.
Yeah. I am a little worried. I just don't see it.
Because they're not double digits over Clemson, right? I don't think.
No.
Yeah.
But still favorable over Ohio State or Tennessee. I mean, that just the thought of Oregon being rewarded for the season they've had by the first game of their playoff being basically a pick-em against Ohio State, one of their rivals, is just, I don't think that's how they drew it up. The committee drew it up as Florida State was supposed to win the ACC, Utah was supposed to win the Big 12, and we weren't supposed to be in the situation where you have SMU and Boise State as 2 of the top 4 teams in the country. That's not how it's all Danny's fault in Florida State at the end of the day. That's how full circle from the start of the season.
She is Mackenzie Brooks. She is our sports line expert and a contributor all through the season on the Cover 3 podcast. And coming up on the other side, one final word from Lucas Oil Stadium, one last chance for best bets, and more next.
Letting me be on this season.
Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network from Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis, site of the Big Ten Championship game. All right, this is last words, last thoughts. We are just counting down to the kickoff of the first games on Friday night, to this game, Oregon and Penn State, Saturday night, 8 p.m. Eastern time on CBS. Stream it on Paramount Plus. Danny, what's lingering in your mind with these teams that we've talked about so much as we count it down to kickoff?
Man, I just can't wait to get them going, right? I love that this weekend, it kind of speaks to the whole season. I think there's been a theme of like parity. The talent has been more spread throughout. The biggest point spread we have is Louisiana against Marshall. It's 5.5, 6 points.
Yep.
Like every other game is around a field goal or tighter. I can't wait to see who the upsets are pulled. I can't wait to see who shines on the big stage. And then, of course, I can't wait till Sunday to kind of see where the seeding falls, who's going to be playing at home, who gets the 12 spot, Clemson-SMU, how does that impact if SMU loses, all those things. Can't wait for the debate, which, by the way, will be in studio on CBS Sports HQ on Sunday at noon, but cannot wait to watch all the games.
I just love this weekend because it's not just that there are good games, and you mentioned there's close spread, there's a lot on the line, but during the season, we're all watching 1,000 games at once. The way that this is spread out over the 2 days, you can kind of just focus more on the 1 or 2 games at a time. You get to see a little bit better live. That's my favorite part of the weekend. So you get the stakes, and the fact that I can watch it all is what I love.
And we're playing for spots. Like we have the opportunity to have bid thieves. Like Clemson could be our first college football bid thief if they were able to beat SMU.
This is a time of the year that makes me think about like all the craziness that's coming with the college football playoff. It is an invitational. Like it ain't a playoff.
Yes.
It is a beauty pageant. It is an invitational. And this is the conclusion of, to me, the football season. Like the college football season are these Saturdays in the fall into winter, filling up these stadiums. I'm excited for the first round on campus. But, we're going to enter into a different postseason. Now, we're excited about it because, don't worry, the Cover 3 podcast is going to have you locked and loaded with breakdowns every single week. But I like this as a chance to celebrate greatness, right? This is a chance to really celebrate the teams that have worked their way through the regular season, the real season of college football.
You know what I really want to see?
There.
I want to see another 8 overtimes in the best overtime in all of sports. I want to see more drama. Let's go.
Yeah, that's right. Danny Kanell, famously a big proponent of the new overtime rules. Well, we appreciate everybody hanging out. Be sure that you continue to keep it locked here at at CBS Sports Network for more coverage of the Big Ten championship game from Indianapolis. And make sure that you check out the Cover 3 podcast, because if you liked what you saw, if you liked what you heard, you can get us all the time on the Cover 3 podcast. You can scan that QR code on the screen, or you can go and search for the Cover 3 podcast and download the Cover 3 podcast wherever you get your best podcasts.
Cover 3 Live Show, Dallas, January 9th.